passport. Programming on WTTW is made possible in part by viewers like you and by the following.
In 1945, Walter Smith Sr. opened a family business in his name. 4 generations in, and the Smith family remains committed to the ideals he set forth. Offer furniture for all Chicagoans, including a variety of styles and price points, and provide service to all who enter our doors, including in-store and in-home design assistance. We look forward to welcoming you into the Smith family, just as we have since 1945.
JCC, Chicago Early Childhood's nurturing classroom communities, welcome children 6 weeks to 5 years. For more information, visit jccchicagoearlychildhood.org.
WTTW programming originates from the Renee Crown Public Media Center.
This show is a roller coaster.
On Finding Your Roots, comedians Louis Black.
Any idea what happened to Grandma after that?
None. It was like a disappearance.
And Roy Wood Jr.
Difficult truths generally don't go discussed.
Finding Your Roots.
Tuesday at 8 on WTTW.
When we deployed to Afghanistan,
Iraq, Korea,
Vietnam,
we're at war.
Fear and anxiety becomes the new normal.
Combat up close changes you. I was so badly injured, my crew thought I was dead. They pulled me out anyway, because you never leave anyone behind.
On D-Day, at 4 o'clock in the morning, I was a boy. 10 o'clock at night, I was a man.
Tuesday at 9 on WTTW.
I'm Sister Mary Lou Rydell, Maryknoll's sister. Gloria Tamayo. You're watching WTTW.
Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. On the show tonight,
I think from day one it's going to be a wonderful attraction.
Chicago readies to take a gamble. Where should a casino go?
The Texas abortion case is back at the Supreme Court. We break down the arguments heard today with 2 legal analysts.
We are digging our own graves. Enough of treating nature like a toilet.
As world leaders meet in Scotland to discuss the climate crisis, we hear of local efforts to divest from fossil fuels.
Some Afghan youth at a local immigration center are traumatized after fleeing their country. We hear from the reporter who broke the story.
Quarterly filings reveal the CNA hack exposed personal information of 75,000 people. That and more business news from Cranes.
Chicago is one of the largest cultural capitals of the world, but how is it faring right now? We talk one-on-one with outgoing Cultural Affairs Commissioner Mark Kelly.
This is the Wigwasajimon, which is a birch bark canoe.
And Northwestern's indigenous artist in residence practices the long-lost art of birch bark canoe building. But first, some of today's top stories. The status quo remains for the city's employee vaccine mandate for now. A Cook County judge ruled today that non-compliant Chicago police officers can still go on no-pay status for disobeying the city's COVID vaccine reporting requirement. But the city cannot enforce the December 31st shot deadline without first going to arbitration. All city employees were directed to report their vaccination status by October 15th and be fully vaxxed by December 31st. 3,435 members of the police department are at risk of discipline right now for not complying. Meanwhile, the city of Chicago releases the latest rate of city worker vaccine compliance. According to the city's Department of Human Resources, nearly 87% of all city employees have reported their vaccination status, and a little more than 82% of those reporting are fully vaccinated. Meanwhile, the worldwide COVID-19 death toll reached 5 million people today. The United States leads with more than 740,000 lives lost during the pandemic. Hundreds of millions of dollars pledged to fight the latest public health crisis in Illinois, gun violence. Governor Pritzker signs an executive order pledging $250 million over the next 3 years to fight gun violence and declaring it a public health crisis. Dubbed the Reimagined Public Safety Plan, the state will open applications to fund community-based anti-violence initiatives.
This is a public health crisis. But now what we're doing is saying throughout all of government that there should be coordination on that idea.
And jury selection begins in the Kyle Rittenhouse case in Kenosha. The judge is hoping to seat the jury quickly, but there are about 150 prospective jurors to question. 12 jurors and 8 alternates will hear the case in which Rittenhouse, who was then 17 years old, crossed state lines from Antioch, Illinois to Kenosha, Wisconsin, where the town was in turmoil after the shooting of Jacob Blake, a black man shot by a white police officer in 2020. Rittenhouse's attorneys say the teen got an AR-15 style rifle to protect businesses after looting and arson. Rittenhouse fatally shot and killed 2 men and wounded a third, but has pleaded not guilty, saying he acted in self-defense. Up next, Mayor Lightfoot has dealt a full house with 5 casino proposals. That's coming up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Want to bet? You could have the chance to do so in Chicago as the city moves forward with long-awaited plans for a casino. Amanda Vinicky joins us now to talk about next steps. Amanda, what's the latest?
Well, Brandis, the cards have been dealt, if you will, and now Chicago has to weigh its options with the 5 bids that it received Friday to decide which company, if any, has the winning hand and where. Now, there is a chance that a casino could be built here at what is now a mostly vacant lot near the South Loop in Chinatown, pitched by developers as the 78, as in Chicago's 78th community area. Or perhaps the casino may land in Convention Central on the grounds of McCormick Place. Also an option. In all, Chicago receiving a handful of options, 5 from 3 different developers. Now, the bids themselves are not yet public at this point. The city has just released the names of the corporations that submitted proposals. And one of those proposals comes from a Hard Rock entity. A spokesperson did not return calls, so we don't know at this point where the Hard Rock would propose to build. Now, you also have Rush Street Gaming proposing casinos at the 78. Again, that's that parcel of land near the South Loop in Chinatown slated for major development. Or the McCormick Place Lakeside Center, where conventioneers could provide a lot of the casino's business. And then there's Bally's Corporation, the gambling and entertainment company. They also are proposing a McCormick Place location near the old Michael Reese site. Also, another proposal for the former Chicago Tribune Publishing Center near Chicago Avenue and Halsted, close to the North Branch of the Chicago River. Corey Aronovitz runs Chicago's casino law group and says each contender brings something to the table. Local casino magnate Neil Bloom's Rush Street has developed casinos in Pittsburgh, also Philadelphia, and runs Illinois' highest grossing casino, Rivers in Des Plaines. So he says it's got a strong local brand. Now, Hard Rock, meanwhile, has a new casino in nearby Gary, Indiana, and is also soon going to be opening a casino in Rockford.
Bally doesn't have a casino here, and what's interesting about their bid, Amanda, is that they want to make this their sort of global landmark, their #1 property. So there's some upside in those types of bids. Rivers is certainly very successful. They're in multiple jurisdictions. And Hard Rock is certainly building its brand, especially with an announcement that they're going to reinvest into Las Vegas market. So you have some real strong suitors.
Strong suitors or suits, can't help it there. But also you're missing some really big names in the gaming industry, MGM, Wynn, or as Mayor Lightfoot once put it, proposals with Las Vegas addresses. Now, Northeastern Illinois University economist Mike Wentz has studied gambling and how that pairs up with local economics, and he says that part of why you see some folks not participating is because of all of the competition. The same law that authorized Chicago's casino also authorized new casinos. There's the one in Rockford, but also Waukegan and the south suburbs, and not to mention all of Illinois' existing casinos.
The market has become much more saturated than it used to. And even within Illinois, the advent of sports gambling and sports books has made a more has made the market maybe a little bit less lucrative for newcomers to enter.
Now, as Chicago officials weigh their options from these 5 proposals, they've got a lot to consider. Wentz says the goal of a casino is really twofold: to raise revenue for Chicago's budget, which of course could use it, and also to create jobs. So that's to be considered when it comes to location.
You want your tourists and out-of-towners and the people who can most afford to spend money in casinos to have as good of access as possible to the casinos. The second one is you want to have the neighborhoods where you're hoping to generate employment growth have access as well. And those aren't necessarily the same places.
Now, for his 2 cents, Aronovitz was interested in a downtown location, but in terms of what you just heard Wentz talking about, well, he says that McCormick Place fits the bill. The west side of it already been developed with Wintrust Arena, for example, but then there is still room to grow, and it's nearly ready to go for a temporary casino while the bigger one is built.
East McCormick is, in need of sort of a facelift. So how do you take that iconic building? How do you retrofit it? You get up and open quickly, and you continue to do economic development. It's a tremendous opportunity to repurpose existing facility. You stop the flow of traffic to Indiana, and there's not many businesses that would be adversely affected right in that area.
At DL3 Realty, Leon Walker is focused on real estate development that creates jobs and improves neighborhoods. And central for him is that a casino is located near public transportation.
You put it in a location where public transit is diminished or lacking, then we're not really doing the best we can to connect to the neighborhoods. And I'm very, very focused on this being not just an opportunity for a few, but being an opportunity that's inclusive of all.
Which gets to the social equity component. There, of course, are going to be jobs created. So things like tellers, servers, card dealers, but leadership roles too. And Walker says the city needs to keep that in mind as it assesses applications.
That can be through contracting opportunities. There are opportunities for local businesses to participate in this, a mega opportunity that a casino represents, and they can build and grow locally in their own neighborhoods.
Northeastern's Wentz says that Chicago also needs to be mindful that it is not putting a casino in an already distressed community, given proof, he says, that casinos can be troublesome in terms of causing pathological gambling addictions. And also to consider places like Atlantic City. A casino coming to an already developed area didn't create or add jobs, it displaced existing businesses.
It would be great for the casino operator. I mean, think of the traffic, think of the people who go through there on a daily basis. It would, and so I think that the city should bear in mind what makes the most sense for the city rather than what makes most sense for a developer.
Once they're talking about traffic, if a casino were to go at that former Chicago Tribune Publishing Center site. Now, in terms of next steps, well, we really don't have a clear timeline for when the city is going to be making its choices and when we'll learn more about what is behind these bids. We do know, however, this isn't just a casino. Chicago's request for proposal wanted anybody who submitted an application to put forward a plan for an entire resort complex with hotel, restaurants, shops, and an entertainment value, plus slots at the airports. So with that, Brandis, that's back to you.
Amanda, thank you. And now to Paris and arguments today at the Supreme Court for a much-watched case. Paris.
Yeah, Brandis, thanks. The Texas abortion case is back at the Supreme Court 2 months to the day after it went into effect. The law empowers private citizens to enforce a ban on abortions as early as 6 weeks of pregnancy. This is the second time the law has come before the High Court. In a ruling 2 months ago, the court, by a 5-4 vote, allowed the law to go into effect pending further action. And joining us to talk about today's Supreme Court arguments are Carolyn Shapiro, professor of law at Illinois Institute of Technology, Chicago-Kent College of Law, and Peter Breen, vice president and senior counsel with the Thomas More Society. Welcome, both of you, back to Chicago tonight. Peter, I paraphrased it at the top, but remind us again the thrust of this Texas law. Peter, I think you're on mute there.
Sorry, I've got little kids running around in the background. Yeah, this Texas law allows private individuals to enforce a 6-week, post 6-week abortion ban. So it's unique in that it's got private individuals doing it instead of the government officials. And so the argument for folks who are on the pro-life side is that, well, if you want to challenge it, you've got to go through the Texas state courts. On the abortion side, they're saying, no, we want to go to federal court and do a pre-enforcement challenge. And so that is what gets us up to the Supreme Court today on this issue of federal court jurisdiction, which you take classes on in law school. It's so complicated. So it's a little difficult of a topic, but it is a very important one for practitioners.
Okay, so whether this belongs in the federal court system is what the Supreme Court is hearing arguments on today. Carolyn, summarize those arguments for us, the arguments that justices heard today.
Well, the argument that the case should be heard now in federal court is that this is, first of all, an unprecedented law. There's never been a law like this, where the state is essentially outsourcing its desire to violate people's constitutional rights. It would be as if a state said, I could sue somebody for any time they bought a gun, or I could sue a gun dealer any time they bought a gun, but not having any state activity in the enforcement other than passing the law and then opening the courts. So the argument on the part of the plaintiffs the plaintiffs who provide medical care to women is that law has such a significant chilling effect. It's a $10,000 bounty at a minimum, plus attorney's fees, for anybody who sues someone who has either aided and abetted an abortion, which is an undefined term, or actually provided an abortion, any doctor who does that, that it has had such a chilling effect that basically abortions are not available right now in Texas. And that is as if Texas had passed a law saying that abortion is illegal at 6 weeks of pregnancy, which it would clearly violate the current Supreme Court precedent.
So it's a different situation because it involves citizens enforcing the law here. Peter Breen, does this mean that there would be a separate hearing on the merits of the law itself once the Supreme Court decides whether or not that this belongs in their jurisdiction?
And there's already a state court case pending on this one. So it's not that they're not going to get a hearing. It's just a matter of where do you actually hear it and when. So do you hear it beforehand? Do you get a federal court hearing? But again, they've got a state court action already pending. And again, as I understand it, there's not a single judge in the state court system in Texas that has upheld the law. So this is a different situation than if you said, oh, the whole judiciary in Texas is ignoring Supreme Court precedent. They're not so far. And I would say, this law is a very sensible regulation. It's a heartbeat bill is what we call it in the abortion parlance. So it would prohibit abortions after a heartbeat, supported by 52% of Texas women, 58% of Latinos, and 51% of millennials, actually. It was interesting.
But Pierre, what about the enforcement? What about the enforcement mechanism? Does that sound constitutional to you? I mean, some people have described it as a bounty.
But we do this, so here's the thing. What they did was they took some things, existing structures in the law. So for environmental issues, we allow private people to go and sue even though they might not have been the ones harmed for false claims. So that's fraud against the government. You can go and sue even though you weren't the one that was defrauded, the government was. So we call it a private attorney general statute. It is a unique statute, though, because the issue here is abortion. Because of this uniqueness of abortion, they've been taken. The problem is if the Supreme Court had not read abortion into the Constitution uniquely, they wouldn't have needed to go to these different lengths in Texas. You're not going to see that in all of the other instances where there is an ability to develop law.
All right, Carolyn, I want to get you a chance to respond here.
Yeah, I think this is not an accurate analogy. The other cases in which people can exercise the interests of the state actually can step in. In this instance, the state is actually expressly prohibited from stepping in. Why? To prevent federal court review of the law. It was designed that way. It was designed to create a chilling effect under which clinics would stop providing abortions, which is what has happened in Texas. And people can sit back and say, well, it's not really violating people's rights because the state's not doing anything. And at some point, years from now, maybe there will be a resolution in the Supreme Court. Now, it's perfectly understandable when states we see this happening a lot. In fact, the Supreme Court a month from today will be hearing a case out of Mississippi where Mississippi has passed a law outlawing abortions as of 15 weeks. I don't know what the Supreme Court is going to do in that case. As a person who supports reproductive rights, I have to admit I'm not very optimistic. But that's an appropriate way of asking the federal courts to consider whether or not they want to revisit the longstanding precedent, as opposed to this kind of underhanded outsourcing of violating people's rights.
Multiple cases on abortion before the Supreme Court potentially. Let's hear what Justice Kavanaugh had to say about an amicus brief that brought up that slippery slope argument.
It could be free speech rights, it could be free exercise of religion rights, it could be Second Amendment rights. If this position is accepted here, the theory of the amicus brief is that it can be easily replicated in other states that disfavor other constitutional rights.
Peter Breen, does that argument have merit, that it is a slippery slope to perhaps Second Amendment cases where a state might say, well, private citizens can bring lawsuits against gun owners or something like that?
Well, the idea of it generally being a slippery slope would work if those other areas were places where you were seeing a lot of, judicial intervention, such as in the abortion space that we've seen over the last 50 years since Roe v. Wade. They don't really need to do that in those other spaces. And so that's as a practical matter, you're not going to see that done. As well, there is a judge in Austin, Texas, state court judge that already issued an injunction against this law. The problem is there are individual plaintiffs that can bring the case, but I haven't seen a single case where the law was allowed to go. So it is a very different situation. They've taken a unique tack. Maybe Congress should change the law to allow these pre-enforcement challenges, but right now Congress hasn't. And the people of the state of Texas, the majority, are happy with their law and the way things are going.
Carolyn,
why shouldn't they be able to do what they've asked, what they want to do?
The people of the state of Texas don't get to decide if somebody's rights are going to be violated. That's the way rights work. So if the Supreme Court decides that it's going to reverse 50 years of precedent and overturn Roe versus Wade, it may well do that. But until it does that, it remains the law of the land that women have a right to obtain medical care, and both the intent and the effect of this law is to make that impossible. The reason you haven't seen cases going forward is because the clinics stopped providing abortions.
All right.
There are, in fact, so there's nobody to sue because the people who would be the defendants.
I'm sorry to cut you off. This is obviously a very weighty issue, but we have to leave it there. A lot to discuss, and perhaps a decision in the coming days and weeks on whether to take up this case and hear further arguments. Our thanks now to Carolyn Shapiro and Peter Breen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And up next, examining the conditions experienced by Afghan refugee children in a local shelter. So please stay with us.
I come from a people that not only found a way to survive through the most horrific circumstances, but they thrived.
I could not save one of the boys of color in my own life. If my family could be exposed to this horror, then really it could happen to anyone. We are truly all in this together.
Afghan children being sheltered at a Heartland Alliance Center in Bronzeville are experiencing challenges, including suicidal tendencies, after fleeing their home country during the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. That's according to a report from ProPublica Illinois that says some Heartland Alliance workers are expressing concerns over children's behavior and say they are ill-equipped to care for the children. Joining us to tell us more about that situation at the Bronzeville Center is Melissa Sanchez, a reporter with ProPublica who covers immigration and low-wage worker issues. Melissa, welcome back, and give us a sense of what you learned is happening inside that immigration shelter.
Sure. So a couple of weeks ago, I started hearing from workers at this shelter, which is in Chicago's Bronzeville neighborhood, that they were overwhelmed and just didn't know how to properly respond to a significant number of Afghan evacuees who had started arriving about 2 months ago. And what they were describing was significant language and cultural barriers that made it hard to communicate with these kids who were coming in with a lot of trauma, were harming themselves, were cutting themselves, were hurting other kids, hurting staff, trying to run away, requiring hospitalization for psychiatric issues. And just the staff was, I've just never seen folks so frustrated and unable to respond the way that they wanted to. These are people who really care about the kids and just didn't know how to do that.
And for reference, how many children are we talking about?
I just got updated numbers today, and at this particular shelter that Heartland runs, there's about 43. Overall, Heartland has 4 shelters that are currently open in Chicago, and they have 77 Afghan evacuees there. And just to get the national understanding, like Heartland has more kids from Afghanistan right now than any other shelter organization in the country. There's a total of 185 according to ORR today.
And from what the staff have told you, what kind of trauma, what have the children been through?
I mean, the U.S. has just pulled out after 2 decades of war there. So there's part of that, the war piece. And then after the pullout, you have all of these people trying to leave Afghanistan as the Taliban is taking over. And children, some with parents, some without parents, made their way to the airports. Along the way, there might have been Taliban checkpoints that separated children from their parents or from the adults that they came with. At the airports, there were more separations. And kids as young as 2, as far as I know at Heartland, kids wound up in airplanes without adults or parents. And some of them ended up spending time at a military base in Germany or in another country, and then eventually made their way here to DC and eventually here to the shelter. So they've kind of gone through all of this separation, leaving their homeland, like war in their homeland, and a lot of confusion about what's happening next. So I think that's what one of the problems is right now, in addition to the fact that they can't communicate directly with the workers, the people who are supposed to take care of them at this shelter, because nobody there speaks the children's languages. It's really, for a lot of them who were separated from a parent or from an adult back home and don't have anybody here that they can be placed with, there's a lot of uncertainty, and that's causing even more anxiety and stress.
So Heartland Alliance has issued a statement, and it reads in part, we have met with city and state partners to address significant systemic barriers to accessing psychiatric assessments for children in need of inpatient care. We are in regular communication with local hospitals and clinicians to augment the limited supports available. At the same time, we have enlisted a provider to begin individual and group therapy for some of the youth. We've also been connecting our Afghan youth with individuals from the Afghan community and offering in-person Jummah prayers, weekly visits to the mosque, and integrating many cultural comforts like foods and activities that the youth are requesting. Melissa, how would you say the staff are working through this, and do they have what they need in order to support the youth?
Yeah, I mean, I think Heartland has made some improvements in the past couple of weeks. I just learned in the past few days that workers got these handheld devices that when you speak into them in English, the device will shoot out in a robot voice the translation. So there's been some progress recently, but some of these kids have been there for more than 2 months. So I'm really delighted that there's some changes, but it's been a really stressful couple of months for the kids and for staff. Staff are still overwhelmed. I'm actually hearing ever since the story published, I've heard from even more workers who are telling me more of the same. I think Heartland's in a really hard spot. I don't know, I don't have any solutions, but I have heard that in Michigan, there's another emergency site that's taking in children from Afghanistan, similar kinds of kids. And it's the shelter is different than Heartland. This is like a big former nursing home, 4-floor, very institutional feeling. This other place is more of a campus with residential cottages. And what an immigration lawyer who spent time there told me is that every single residential cottage has at least one person on site who's an interpreter who speaks these kids' languages. And when I told the workers here at Heartland about that, they were just so jealous. That was the word that they used. They wish that kind of thing could exist here. And I want to say that's not entirely on Heartland. This is the federal government's responsibility. These children are in the care of the Office of Refugee Resettlement of the U.S. government. So I think ORR, the government has shown that they can do this right, they can do this better, as the Michigan case illustrates, where the lawyers told me that they're not dealing with the same kinds of problems we're dealing with here. So I think there's the possibility that things can get improved here. I mean, clearly the language issue is really significant.
Obviously. And Heartland Alliance has also said in a statement that the shelter is heavily recruiting the staff that speak the children's languages, but the process has been delayed due to vetting and background checks. And you write that Pashto and, say it for me, Pashto and Dari are the name of the languages that they speak. A heartbreaking case. I'm sure you will remain on it. Melissa Sanchez at ProPublica, Illinois. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And now, Paris, we toss it back to you.
Thanks, Brandis. And there's much more ahead on the program, including a look at how Chicago's art scene is recovering when we talk to the city's outgoing Cultural Affairs Commissioner. But first, today is November 1st, the start of Native American Heritage Month. And in Evanston, one man is keeping a Native American tradition alive. Chicago Tonight's Evan Garcia recently visited Northwestern University to learn about birch bark canoe building.
The spirits that live in this place, they never forgot the Anishinaabe. They never forgot who we are. So they are happy today that this birch bark is going to go in that lake.
Wayne Villier is a birch bark canoe builder. He's the master of what some might call a lost art.
This is a Wigwasa Jimon, which is a birch bark canoe. And this style of birch bark canoe comes from the Anishinaabe. I'm a Ojibwe Anishinaabe from Lac du Flambeau, Wisconsin. And some people call us Chippewas, but we're Ojibwe. This canoe is made out of all natural materials from northern Wisconsin.
As Northwestern's artist in residence, Villier built this 16-foot canoe with students in about 2 weeks. Different wood was harvested throughout the year, from the spruce root stitching to the cedar ribs to the birch bark sides covered in pine pitch.
Got my fingerprint in there.
Villier says he is one of only 6 remaining birch bark canoe builders among the Anishinaabe people.
They're made by hand. We have the benefit of a few 2x4 jigs and some cordless drills, but other than that, all the work is still there. And be a canoe builder, it's a great privilege because you get to go in so many different environments on our grandmother. Our grandmother's the earth. We call her Nokomis-Sakiminan. She's much older than a Mother Earth.
On a stormy morning at Northwestern, Villier and others set the birch bark canoe on Lake Michigan, something Villier says hasn't been done from a Chicago area shore in nearly 400 years. By preserving the art of birch bark canoe building, Villier says he hopes to pass on the importance of protecting the earth.
It's so important that we maintain healthy forests and clean water, because without either, nobody's going to live on this planet.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Evan Garcia.
The Ojibwe are part of the Anishinaabe, a collective of indigenous people living in the Great Lakes region. And when he's not building birch bark canoes, Wayne Villier is an Ojibwe language and culture teacher at Lac du Flambeau School in northern Wisconsin. Northwestern's Indigenous Artist in Residence program is part of the university's Center for Native American and Indigenous Research, and you can visit our website to learn more. And still to come on Chicago Tonight, Chicago's $1 million listings. October sees a record number of homes sold on the high end of the market. That and more from Cranes. Scientists are warning of a looming climate catastrophe if countries continue to burn fossil fuels. The effort to invest in a sustainable future. From small neighborhood festivals to homegrown Pitchfork, Chicago holds a rich arts and culture legacy. We talk one-on-one with the outgoing Cultural Affairs Commissioner. But first, some more of today's top stories. Former Chicago Alderman Edward Fast Eddie Verdoliak is heading to federal prison. A federal judge ordered the 83-year-old to report to a medical facility by the end of the month to start serving his 18-month sentence. Verdoliak was convicted of tax evasion almost a year ago, but because of health issues and the COVID-19 pandemic, his report date was delayed until a vaccine was widely available. The number 2 in the city's watchdog office resigns in the hopes that she can be named the top dog. Deborah Witzberg resigned today as Deputy Inspector General for Public Safety. That's 15 days after former Inspector General Joe Ferguson left the office. And instead of tapping her to lead the office on an interim basis, Mayor Lightfoot tapped William Marbach, who served as Deputy Inspector General for Investigations. That move surprised several members of the Chicago City Council who had expected Witzberg, not Marbach, to replace Ferguson while committee conducted a search for Ferguson's permanent replacement. Witzberg told Lightfoot and Marbach that her final day in office would be November 12th. And you can read more about this story on our website. Sweeping conspiracy charges brought against gang leaders in Austin today. Federal prosecutors charged 13 alleged leaders of the traveling vice lords' Wicked Town faction with 19 murders, 19 attempted murders, and numerous armed robberies and assaults dating back to at least July 2000. According to the indictment, the Wicked Town members regularly threatened, intimidated, and promoted themselves on social media. The CTA is celebrating the Chicago Sky's WNBA championship. The specially designed train is wrapped in the team's signature colors and logo. It debuted today on the CTA's Green Line, where it passes the Wintrust Arena. That's where the team won this year's championship. The Chicago Sky train will be in service throughout the end of the year. A major ransomware attack at a large Chicago financial company. A tentative deal is struck after nearly 10,000 John Deere employees went on strike, and October sees record home sales on the high end of the Chicago market. Here to go behind the headlines is Crain's Chicago business editor Ann Dwyer. Ann, great to see you as always. So a major breach here, a ransomware attack at CNA Financial downtown. Tell us what was compromised.
Well, it looks like about 75,000 people or more may have seen their Social Security numbers and even in some cases their personal health information, Paris, be released out onto the World Wide Web through this hack. This shows that the nightmare of ransomware corporate hacks is still rippling through the U.S. economy. The CNA hack was one of the largest in corporate history. Now, CNA is trying to make things right with the people that they say are affected. They reported today that they're going to be offering things like 2 years of free credit reporting services, etc. But meanwhile, CNA also disclosed today that their own cyber insurance is not going to cover the cost of this hack, which actually happened back in March. They're just disclosing some of these details now. So it really looks like, Paris, what we first thought was just a hack that made life difficult for CNA internally had far wider ramifications for a lot of people who do business with that company.
Well, it seems like a quagmire right now. Okay, quagmire maybe averted out near the Quad Cities. 10,000 John Deere employees strike a deal with the company. UAW had been on strike. What happened there?
Well, this is the first strike, Paris, that's happened at Deere since 1986. And the outcome, at least in this tentative deal, tells you a lot about how much muscle organized labor has nowadays, with corporate profits being so high and access to skilled workers being so tight. The union negotiators managed to extract a 10% pay hike out of Deere in this tentative deal. That's versus the 5 or 6% that they were offered before the strike began a couple of weeks ago. There are other factors in the deal. One thing that's worth calling out, I think, is that the deal will call for no more two-tier system. In other words, anyone that's hired after 1997 will be eligible for the same benefits package, which is really quite remarkable. That two-tier system has been something that's really taken hold at big manufacturers for the past couple of decades. Now, the rank-and-file workers will have a chance to have their voices heard. They vote on the deal tomorrow.
UAW exerting some muscle out there. Okay, and then back here in Chicago, 74 homes in Chicago were sold at more than $4 million apiece. That's a pretty high number. What's behind the surge here in the high end of the real estate market?
Well, it's not just a high number. Our residential real estate reporter, Dennis Rodkin, who lives for this sort of thing, tells me that it's actually a record. We haven't seen this many 4 million plus sales in the city of Chicago in this time period ever. And what the realtors who work in the upper strata of the real estate market are telling us is that there are a couple of factors driving this. One, of course, is that Chicago high-end real estate is actually a relative bargain compared to other cities around the U.S. and around the world. So people who are shopping for those $5 million pied-à-terres are seeing Chicago as an attractive place to plunk down some money. Another thing that's driving it, Paris, is the stock market boom. It's created a lot of wealth to spend among people who are lucky enough to have big portfolios. And all of that means that sales of 4 million up are hot and are going to continue to be hot. We're talking about some eye-popping price points up to $12.5 million. One note that Dennis shares is that the St. Regis is a real focal point of a lot of this action. I believe that 8 of the 4 million plus sales that took place so far this year were in that building.
And then, as I understand, and the former Tribune Tower as well, or it's still the Tribune Tower, but now it's condos. They've been doing well in that end of the market as well. All right, we have to leave it there. Our thanks to Ann Dwyer.
Thank you.
And now, Brandis, we toss it back to you.
Paris, thank you. World leaders, though notably not China's President Xi Jinping or Russia's Vladimir Putin, are currently meeting in Scotland to discuss how to avert a global climate catastrophe. The meeting is being billed as humanity's last chance to tackle climate change before it's too late. Here's a little of what President Biden had to say earlier today.
We're standing at an inflection point in world history. We have the ability to invest in ourselves and build an equitable, clean energy future, and in the process, create millions of good-paying jobs and opportunities around the world.
Now, joining us now are 3 people directly involved in an effort to invest in a more sustainable future. John Palfrey, president of the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. The $8.2 billion foundation announced in September it is shifting its investments away from fossil fuels. Steph Tai, professor of law at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Tai was previously an appellate attorney in the Environmental and Natural Resources Division of the U.S. Department of Justice. And Catherine Wyatt, chief investment officer at Loyola University Chicago, which earlier this month announced its decision to divest from fossil fuel investments. Welcome all of you to Chicago tonight. So John Palfrey, let's start with you, please. We know the MacArthur Foundation announced it was divesting from fossil fuels in September. How did you all arrive at this decision?
Thanks, Brandis. Well, I certainly agree with the president that we are on the precipice here relative to climate change, and we need to build a more equitable and inclusive future. And the way to do that, I think, is to use all of the resources at our disposal. And so for many years, MacArthur has made its largest area of grant making climate change and climate equity. And we realized that we could do more by divesting our endowment funds, as well as investing endowment funds in other forms of clean energy. So it's really a divest, invest type strategy.
And Catherine Wyatt, you know, it's one thing, obviously, for an institution to make this decision to divest, but you, as the chief investment officer at Loyola, you're responsible for actually implementing that decision. How do you go about scrutinizing investments to identify fossil fuel connections?
Sure. Well, you know, there are a lot of structural considerations when you break down the portfolio investments. So we use different kinds of vehicles to access investment strategies, and there are varying degrees of control that we have. There are a lot of things that we can control and some that we can't. So I'd break it down into 3 major categories. We have direct investments in liquid and marketable securities or funds, which we can sell. We have direct investments in illiquid and private funds, which we are in the process of winding down. And, you know, most importantly, we're not making further commitments. And then the third is that we have some residual and indirect exposure through commingled funds, for example, index funds or other actively managed funds. So we plan to monitor the materiality of these exposures and prudently evaluate on a case-by-case basis. And this is where our positive lens of environmental, social, and governance framework comes in. So we plan to measure the ESG characteristics of the portfolio and proactively engage with our active managers on ESG issues. And, you know, we tend to invest with managers where fossil fuel exposure is not a major part of their investment strategy anyway.
Okay, and Steph Ty, you're supporting an effort to get the University of Wisconsin Foundation to disclose how much of its $3.5 billion endowment is invested in fossil fuel companies and to develop alternatives. How transparent are the investments at the UW Foundation endowment?
It's not particularly transparent, which is why we are trying to work on this effort, both from the faculty side, the staff side, and the student side. All of us have passed resolutions suggesting both divestment and also just future transparency. And that has not yet followed, but we are still working on this in terms of having future conversations with our Wisconsin Alumni Foundation.
And how has the leadership at both the university and the University Foundation been responding to your efforts?
So the leadership at the Wisconsin system has been great, well, at least Wisconsin-Madison, although we have had a change in leadership with our chancellor leaving. So we're in a chancellor search right now. So we don't know what will happen in the future. With the Wisconsin Alumni Foundation, there's been mixed kind of approaches. And so that's a lot of the effort that's going on, is to sort of try to negotiate with the Wisconsin Alumni Foundation, which is accepting of the actual facts of climate change, but not entirely recognizing some of the risks involved in fossil fuel investments.
So last week, the CEOs of several major oil companies testified in a congressional hearing. The companies were accused of deliberately lying to the public on what they knew about how fossil fuels were contributing to global warming. Here's a little of what ExxonMobil CEO Darren Woods had to say in response.
ExxonMobil has been engaged in policy discussions related to the energy and environment for years. Our views on policies and its implications have been guided by our understanding of the science.
And Steph Ty, sticking with you for a minute, you're a legal expert, of course, well versed in environmental law. What are the chances that big oil companies and energy companies could be held culpable if they're proven to have lied about what they knew and when they knew it?
So I'm going to break this down into two different parts. So in general, in terms of fossil fuel companies being held culpable for fossil fuel emissions, it's happening much more in Europe than in the United States. That's where a lot of the financial risk in terms of investment into fossil fuel companies that are global come from, is like sort of liabilities in the EU mostly. But with respect to the United States, in terms of specific allegations of fraud, that's open, right? A lot of the congressional inquiries are really honing in on specific instances of fraud, and we'll have to see where that goes.
Okay, John Palfrey, back to you. What do you do if you have a conglomerate or a utility that might have both green energy as well as fossil fuel assets? Do you divest or do you stay?
It's a great question, Brandon. And one thing with MacArthur, as with many large endowments, we don't invest directly in companies. We invest through funds of various kinds. And so what we've done is to say, when we're looking at these broad indices, like what Catherine said, we are buying an index that is pulling out of it companies that we consider to be fossil fuel companies, particularly holding fossil fuel reserves. We're also saying to all of the fund managers, we do not wish to be in these companies. And we are, to the extent that we hold a small number of direct investments in funds that have oil and gas exploration, those we're selling over time. So I would say in general, now is the time to err on the side of divestment in dirty energy and to invest in clean energy solutions and to focus equity exposure in those areas, as well as to think about equity for the society as a whole. So in general, err on the side of aiming for a much cleaner economy.
And Catherine Wyatt, how long do you anticipate this process of divestment could take?
Well, it could. I mean, there are steps that we have already taken in terms of the liquid investments. There's a fund that we have already exited that had a direct exposure to fossil fuels. And frankly, that was one of the primary objectives of the fund in our inflation hedging bucket. So we have exited that investment. For the other marketable securities that we could readily sell, we are committed to doing it in an expedient manner, but something that is also financially prudent. So we're actively engaged, working with the portfolio manager on kind of establishing a reasonable time frame to exit these investments. And then lastly, on the private side, these are long life partnerships that are winding down. It could take 5 to 10 years. However, with no new commitments, the exposure will quickly become immaterial.
And John Palfrey, back to you. How easy is it to identify alternative, environmentally friendly, or at least neutral investments?
So many opportunities, Brandis. This is a great moment, I think, for the plus side of this equation, the invest side, and we think of that as impact investments, where you're looking at the positive impact on society first and return second, as well as ones that really are return first. So I think there are many, many, many opportunities. If you are not finding opportunities, you are not looking hard enough, or putting up the flag and saying you're open to that. So I think there are plenty of opportunities for us to do this across our portfolio and in all the ways that we spend our money across a foundation or a university, such as procurement.
Okay, that's a good place to leave it. My thanks to John Palfrey, Catherine Wyatt, and Steph Ty for joining us to talk about this. Up next, how are Chicago's arts and cultural scenes faring amid the pandemic? But first, a look at the weather.
From birthing jazz, gospel, blues, and house music to hosting large festivals like Lollapalooza, there's a lot to be embraced in Chicago's creative scene. Commissioner of the Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events, Mark Kelly, was in charge of fostering the development of Chicago's arts and culture for the past 5.5 years. His last day in office was on Friday. And Mark Kelly, the city's outgoing Cultural Affairs and Special Events Commissioner, joins us now. Mr. Kelly, congratulations on your tenure and your retirement. Let's start with the reaction that the arts and culture scene has had as COVID has started to subside. How are stages and venues doing now, and are there any casualties?
Well, there's surely going to be some casualties. One of the most devastated industries, not just in Chicago but across the country, was arts and culture. The music clubs, the theaters, our dance performances, all are just coming back. There's some encouraging signs, but there's still a long way to go, and that's why for the last couple of years, DCASE has been trying to assemble a number of resources to help this vital part of the Chicago scene.
And part of those resources is public funding, and under your watch, the city has boosted funding for arts and culture by about $26 million. Tell us where that additional money goes toward.
Well, actually, Paris, if you add it all up, it's over $100 million that we've assembled beyond DCASE's annual budget, which is an unprecedented number. But so that includes everything from our cultural grants fund this year was $3 million. Next year, it's going to be $20 million. It'll mean we'll have one of the top cultural grants programs in the city. Our public art funds, back 5 years ago, it was $100,000 a year. Going forward, we're going to have $3 million a year in public art to offer up to our neighborhoods. We have all kinds of new programs that are supporting the cultural vitality of our neighborhood. Chicago Presents and Neighborhood Access and Artist Response. We're working with the Chicago Park District and the Chicago Public Library to animate the cultural centers peppered throughout the city and largely on the south and west side. So there's just a lot of necessary funds coming forward to push arts and culture forward in the city.
Certainly, that's a big number, $100 million. Can that number be sustained in the coming years to keep up these investments in these programs?
Well, so that funding is coming from a number of sources. $16 million of that is from the American Rescue Plan. So it's true that that money won't continue 2 years from now. But the rest of that funding, it's foundations, it's our fellow city agencies joining us in partnership. The public art funds are coming from the city's capital fund. For the first time, public art has been deemed part of the city's infrastructure. It's not an extra. It's part of what we do in all neighborhoods. And so building public art into the city's infrastructure goes forward. The cultural centers that we're bringing to life, especially on the south and west side, the funding comes from TIF. It comes from the Park District Capital Fund. So there's just a variety of resources that we've brought together.
And I would assume that the cultural center is part of your legacy here. The Chicago Cultural Center downtown, major restoration, other restorations. Talk about why that was so important to you.
Well, the Grand Army of the Republic is a Tiffany masterpiece, but it's been lost in time. So it's being restored with, if you can imagine, over a $15 million donation, an anonymous donor. And so we'll restore it as a Tiffany masterpiece, but we'll also restore it as a monument to the defeat of the slaveocracy. The Grand Army of the Republic was the Union soldiers, black and white. The 31 battles, the major battles that they won, are in the marble in that room. And so it's exciting to bring that room forward. A new mission for the Chicago Cultural Center, which is to set the cultural compass for our visitors, and then to connect this cultural center downtown to all the cultural centers across the city. It's very exciting.
Another huge part of the cultural landscape in Chicago, music, of course, birthplace of electric blues, so instrumental in jazz, gospel, house music. What does the city need to do to celebrate that heritage in the way Memphis celebrates its blues heritage or Nashville celebrates its country heritage?
Well, it's a great question, and we've made a heck of a lot of progress in this last 2 years. So this is the year of Chicago music. It was to be 2020, moved it into 2021, brought $5 million forward in support for our musicians and the clubs. And we have the first ever music brand in the city of Chicago, Music in the Key of Chicago. And we're working with Choose Chicago with all our partners to push out the word. Chicago is one of the great music capitals. And if you love music, you come to our clubs, you come to our festivals. But there's not one sound at Chicago. There's the multiplicity of sounds, and that's what makes the city great. And all of that work and the Chicago in Tune Festival, where we're bringing that spotlight to music, that will continue.
No doubt about that. A panoply of sounds characterizes Chicago music. So what's next for you, Mark Kelly?
Well, on Saturday, I was no longer the commissioner, but I had on a ringmaster outfit. And as the artistic director of Arts in the Dark, I was joining everyone, Mayor Lightfoot, on State Street with thousands of people as arts groups of Chicago from every neighborhood marched down State Street. So I'm going to continue to be out there. I'm going to be a friend of the arts and helping in every way that I can. And I'm just going to be like all of us. I get to enjoy the power of theater, dance, music, our museums, our public art, our architecture. I get to be another citizen enjoying the glories of something that has been put together by so many people.
No doubt we're all lucky to enjoy all of those things here in our fair city. And our thanks to Mark Kelly. Thanks very much and congratulations.
Thank you, Paris.
And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
That's our show for this Monday night.
Please join us tomorrow night live at 7. How COVID-19 vaccines might protect people against other coronaviruses like the common cold.
And meet the new artistic directors of Steppenwolf Theater and tour the new building before it opens to the public. And we leave you tonight with more from the Ojibwe. And now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm pleased to give back to the community. through numerous charitable initiatives.